Seven municipalities.
7 municipalities reporting, so that doesn't allow us to have a quorum. So we're just going to roll into a general discussion, but let's have the flag salute anyhow. That's part of the stand for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'm going to skip the executive board report and the secretary treasurer report, and I'm going to move to the Pinelands Commission executive staff. We have Susan Grogan, our executive director here, who's going to update us on a couple of the issues.
So I don't have too many things because I know we have a couple of presentations to go through tonight. So just a couple of quick updates. The commission has a new member of the commission for Lansing County appointed, Doug Wallner, who was sworn in at the commission's September meeting about 2 weeks ago. So we're happy to have him and hope he will be participating in many committees and projects going forward. Another thing the commission is participating in is the Department of Environmental Protection's new initiatives related to Wharton State Forest and off-road vehicle use, or all-terrain vehicle. I can't remember the term they're using, but they're kicking off a new initiative. Has several different parts to it, one of which is a survey tool and a mapping tool. I believe that's what they're going to be launching and explaining at their stakeholders meeting going on as we sit here. They are having a virtual meeting with stakeholders. They started at 6 o'clock tonight. So they'll be talking about how the public and other stakeholders can submit information about Wharton and damage they see in Wharton, or issues they have, or suggestions they have about mapping and how better to get a handle on all the different users and interest in Wharton. They were talking about, there's also some outreach and education going on. DEP is hopeful that they'll be establishing a new permit system along with some new enforcement authority. So that'll be an ongoing effort, but they are launching tonight, like I said, at 6 o'clock tonight. So other commission staff are attending that meeting, so we'll be reporting back to you and the commission on that.
Maybe that's where our rest of our mayors are at.
Well, I did wonder when all these meetings started to happen.
Yeah.
Today there was an earlier meeting too, and a different DEP meeting earlier today. Of course, Stewardship Task Force, Senator Smith's board Stewardship Task Force was meeting at 4 today. I don't know what was magic about the 27th, but yeah, so it may be that people are, spread a little too thin.
Yeah, this is unusual.
This is strange.
This is very strange.
And we really thought that with the topics that were on the agenda, particularly the stormwater presentations on DEP, that would have attracted some additional interest, but it just maybe there was too much going on today. So just two other things. Commission staff is working with a number of Pinelands municipalities on rezoning proposals or the adoption of new redevelopment plans. We've seen a bit of a trend. A lot of municipalities are into us to talk about how to accommodate new proposed very large non-residential uses, otherwise known as warehouses. So we have, much like throughout the state, a lot of interest, a lot of companies running around through the funds trying to locate and identify sites that make sense for warehouse development. We have 4 or 5 where municipalities have informally approached the commission asking about how they can change their zoning to accommodate warehouses. For the most part, they're being proposed in a designated interregional growth area where sewer service and this type of intensive development is permitted, but they're being proposed in residentially zoned areas. And so So we're going to be discussing that issue with the Commission's Policy and Implementation Committee on Friday morning. So you're all invited to attend that, participate in the discussion. We have some thoughts about how we can help the towns and help them make their zoning changes and accommodate this type of development in a way that doesn't result in a lot of upheaval in terms of residential potential and additional concerns with traffic and all of that. So that'll be an ongoing discussion as we work with our town. And then finally, I just wanted to mention, so Gina Bird of our staff is here tonight to give you a bit of a summary of proposed rules that the commission we're in the midst of a rulemaking process for amendments to the comprehensive management plan related to withdrawals from the Aquifer, because review and comments on CMP amendments is really one of the primary functions of the council. We wanted to give you a presentation of what those amendments would do. And Gina will give you an idea of the schedule. We're in the comment period right now, so she can give you some of the sort of milestones in the schedule we're following on that. So if you don't mind, we just have her get started with her slides and yes.
Sure. So I'm getting questions from mayors and townships that I work in. What was the premise of starting to charge them like a premium for these warehouses where with a warehouse you have less public, you have less usage of water and sewer there. They don't get, they're asking me why they're being penalized pretty much. Do you know what the reasoning is for Pinelands to?
I'm not sure what that means, penalizing them.
Well, they're hitting them with a extra charge per square foot of that building as a.
Well, so what's happening is, we have a number of towns that they've adopted, years ago, redevelopment plans to permit high density residential housing and affordable. And now we have the warehouse developer coming in saying, well, why don't you change all that so we can build a warehouse and use up, I don't know, some of these are huge, so they're using up a lot of vacant land. And wiping out the residential development potential that was zoned for there. They're replacing it with a warehouse. So from the commission's perspective, municipalities in the regional growth area are required to zone for certain amounts of residential development and provide an opportunity for so many houses, and they use the Pinelands development credits. So that's what their zoning plans do now. So now when this happens, what they're proposing is to replace a huge chunk of that residential development potential with a warehouse. So we're trying to figure out on our end, how can we accommodate that without making the town take those units that could have been built on that warehouse site and accommodate them somewhere else in the municipality, because that's almost impossible these days, is for them to find another site in the growth area where that amount of residential development can effectively be transferred.
Okay.
So we're struggling with, well, how do we let this happen? How can we find a way to make this work without completely obliterating the residential development potential and the use of Pinelands development credit? So one of the things we're going to be talking to the policy committee about on Friday morning is perhaps the commission could say, if a municipality wanted to accommodate one of these projects, not worry about the number of housing units that aren't going to be built, but effectively just take the Pinelands development credit obligation that would have applied to those houses and apply it to whatever non-residential development is coming, it's taking up all of the land. That's a different approach. It's not something that the commission's rules expressly authorize, but we're looking for a way to figure out how can we accommodate the use when it's completely, in many cases, just wiping out a lot of the zoning that was in place. And so it's one possible approach that we're going to be asking the committee to talk about on Friday morning to see if that's something they'd be willing to do.
Does this fee apply to all warehouse development or just those in?
No, and it's not a fee. It's only for these these particular, we have 4 or 5 of these things that are just in the very early stages. They're not applications. We're not talking about, projects that are before the municipality is getting approvals. It's just the towns coming and saying, well, we want to permit this here in an area where it's not permitted. What do we have to do? And so we're trying to help them come up with amendments to their zoning plans or a new redevelopment plan in a way that the commission can approve. So it's really just saying, well, how many units could have been built here under the approved zoning plan? How many opportunities for PDCs were provided under the plan that the commission approved and required? Can we transfer some of that to whatever this new thing is that's being proposed? So it's not all warehouses, it's not all non-residential development, it's only when they're being proposed in an area where they're not permitted. That's really what's happening here. And in other cases, we've had warehouse proposals being made in a Pinelands forest area, for example, where there's no sewer service permitted, and it's 1 million square feet of a warehouse being permitted. And in that case, we just said, you need to find somewhere that's designated for growth, that has infrastructure, that can support something like this. So there are other proposals floating around, but the ones we're focusing on are in the growth areas where we know the towns, really would like to find a way to accommodate this. They need to change their zoning. We're trying to figure out a way to make that happen. And it's likely to require some number of Pinelands development credits, because we can't just erase those. They have to still be provided somehow. So
I think they're just seeing a very large rate of this being pulled out from under them when you have all this extra residential. Now you have more police, you have more schools, you have all the other things to go with it. And they're feeling choked out now, because when the planning steps in and says, well, this is how much each credit is going to be in per so many square foot, you have to buy them. And when you go to the developer, someone will have the extra $1 million to put that building up.
Yes, we do understand that. I will say that the projects that I'm talking about and the developers that, we have been in discussions with, along with the towns, have indicated that they don't have a problem with the PDC.
I understand that, but I'm trying to be fair to all the towns in the Pinelands.
Oh, sure, yeah. I understand that. And again, it's something that's really only come up in association with these, 1 or 1.2 million square foot warehouse. We're not talking about, Wawa or something small, which is much more easily accommodated through zoning change. This is, these are very large facilities that take up significant amounts of vacant residential zone property. So we're trying to figure out a way to make that work so that if the towns do want to accommodate that, they can, without, in a way that the commission can approve. So it's a little bit of a balance.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'm happy to talk about that further anytime, or if people have questions, we can do that, but
I believe they're going to attend a meeting, so.
that's fine. And we
They asked me and I had no answers. I said, I'm good.
Yeah,
Questions.
we deliberately scheduled the meeting for this Friday morning because we want the commission to hear from the towns and perhaps from the representatives of the developers about what's being proposed and why it's important to them and where they want to put these uses so that the commissioners can hear directly. We have invited them all to come. We have sent them the agendas to make sure they're aware of the meeting so that we can have a full discussion and make sure everybody's comfortable. Again, really, we're focusing on just these very large handful of proposals, but certainly some of the same concerns have been raised over the many years with, and we could pick a different non-residential use. Sometimes that happens, and it's not always easy to accommodate them, but we're going to try.
Right.
We're going to try. So.
Okay,
So Gina, you want to
Gina, you're up to bat.
see how this works?
All righty, I'm gonna share my screen. Is that coming across okay?
Yes.
It's good.
All right. So, good evening. I am going to discuss with you the proposed rule amendments for our water management section of the CMP, Comprehensive Management Plan. I'm going to go through with a pretty light touch. These rules can get somewhat technical. So if at any time things aren't making sense, just feel free to stop me and I'll be happy to try and clarify things. So this is a rule amendment about protecting the Kirkwood-Cohansey Aquifer, which underlies the Pinelands and supports our Pinelands ecosystem. And it is also a water supply for a lot of people in the Pinelands area in South Jersey in general. I like pictures, so here's a picture of what we mean when we talk about the Kirkwood-Cohansey Aquifer. It's a sandy geological formation. It's kind of a layer cake with the Cohansey Formation on top and the Kirkwood Formation below, but it waves and sometimes it's hard to distinguish one from the other, but that is essentially what it looks like. The reason for these rule amendments is based in the Gibson Bill, which was a legislative act that happened back in the early 2000s, and it directed that hydrologic studies and impact studies on water use from the Kirkwood-Cohansey should happen, and it provided funding for those. And as a result of those studies, we discovered that greater protection was needed for the aquifer. But at the same time, we realized that the comprehensive management plan as regards water management needed to have clear requirements and standards. So that is why we are proposing these amendments. Some of the more technical things in the rule relate to basins. So we're defining what's meant by interbasin transfer versus intra-basin transfer, and that becomes important when a municipality or a water utility or any user that wants to draw from the Kirkwood-Cohansey Aquifer at a rate of over 50,000 gallons per day is asking to send water from one basin to another. And so we have to evaluate those impacts based on whether it's within a basin or whether it's across basin boundaries. So that's an important part of this rule proposal. A really important part of the rule proposal are these aquifer diversion standards that apply to these smaller wells pumping 35 gallons per minute, which equates to that 50,000 gallons per day. We're setting specific management areas, that's Pinelands management areas, where water from the Kirkwood-Cohansey can be withdrawn. We're being more clear about what constitutes a viable alternative to the Kirkwood-Cohansey, and we're setting specific numeric standards to say what constitutes an adverse ecological impact, whether it's a regional impact or a local impact. There are water conservation requirements in the CMP already, and we're going to make those a little more clear. And one additional thing we're doing with this rule proposal is adding notice requirements. So these other concepts, if you will, already exist within the comprehensive management plan in the water management section. We're just fine-tuning them and tightening that threshold for Kirkwood-Cohansey wells down to 50,000 gallons per day. The only new thing really for these wells is that notice requirement. So this just is reiterating that we're, currently regulating wells that withdraw 100,000 gallons per day from the aquifer, and we're bringing that down to 50,000 gallons per day. Replacement wells don't have to apply to us if they meet the definition of a replacement well. And of course, wells used for exclusively agricultural, horticultural use don't have to apply to the Pinelands Commission. And that's the way it is today, and that won't change. So which management areas are we looking at to prohibit new wells or new diversions? And those areas are our most protective, our most restrictive management areas: the Preservation Area District, the Forest Area, and the Special Agricultural Production Area, and some small villages that are located within the Preservation Area District. So new or increased diversions can come in any of the other regional growth areas, provided they meet the other standards that I'm going to go through. So the current rule says that a diversion is permitted only if no viable water supply sources exist, but it doesn't really define what's meant by viable. So the rule is going to clarify the locations where we think there are alternatives, either in a different aquifer or from a different public water supply purveyor, like Suez or Suez, or what's the other one? New Jersey American. And then we also identified different aquifers that should take precedence for water use before the Kirkwood Cohansey. So that clears what's viable. And then the standard for no adverse ecological impacts, which is currently in the rule, is not well defined. So we're going to be setting specific objective standards based on those Kirkwood Cohansey studies that I mentioned, that, there were, I forget how many, 20, a lot of studies to help us determine what would constitute an adverse ecological impact. And further, the new rule breaks down those adverse ecological impacts, looking at regional impacts and local impacts. So I don't want to get into the weeds here too much. It's pretty easy to do with this, but let me just say that as far as the adverse regional impact, we're relying on the statewide water supply plan. The State Geosciences Office sets a certain volume of water called the low flow margin within all these smaller watersheds across the state. And we're using that tool to say, you can't use more than the low flow margin. And that low flow margin is an ecological, ecologically based standard to prevent too much water use from the surface aquifer. And no adverse local impacts. This is about how much drawdown occurs from pumping a well. And we've set up a 4-step process and set a maximum amount of drawdown that it can occur, which is 4 inches. And I have this little clip here on the side, which is a clip from one of the studies that's the basis of this standard, that says depth reductions of greater than 10 to 15 centimeters or 4 inches has greater impacts on the development of important species to the Pinelands, such as the Pinelands tree frog and some other amphibian species. So that's our no adverse local impact part. There's a clarification of the water conservation standards where applicants for withdrawals from the Kirkwood Cohansey are required to address water conservation. So the new rule says you have to tell us specifically what you're going to do to conserve water and how you're going to put that into effect once you have your water system distributing that water. And lastly, as I mentioned, the new rules are going to require notice for these diversions because we're using that low flow margin in the statewide water supply plan. Multiple municipalities can share a single watershed of that size, and that if one uses up more of the low flow margin and that leaves nothing for the other municipalities, we want them to be aware of it. So this is just a notice requirement, and it gives other municipalities the opportunity to comment on that, that water use. Currently, there are application fees associated with wells. Under the proposed rule, because it is going to demand more work for the staff, we are increasing the fee for Kirkwood Cohansey wells to $6,000. All other wells will be increased to $1,000. And then there will be a requirement to fund an escrow for the analysis and modeling of those ecological impacts. As Sue mentioned, we have our schedule looking forward. The public hearing on this rule proposal is scheduled for 9:30 on October 12th. And the public comment period ends November 5th. We certainly welcome all your comments and thoughts, whether you share them by email or submit formal comments during the public hearing. The information is up on our website, or we can send it to you separately, however works for you. Looking forward, once we review the comments and prepare a response to comments, we would look to, publish, thank you, publish the adoption notice in mid-December, and that would leave us with the rule proposal the amendment taking effect in early 2023. So I zoomed right through that, but I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
What are the fees right now for the wells?
They're based on construction costs.
It's on a percentage of construction cost. Do you have a range, Gina, of what it typically is?
So most recently it was in the range of $600. No, that's not right, $300. Yes, in the range of 300, and that's just insufficient to cover the level of review that's required.
And so the one's gonna go to 6,000?
Those are, again, remember, those are the very large wells. The majority of them won't be subject to that new fee. We're talking about wells that are, new wells or increased wells that are being proposed of at least 50,000 gallons per day or more. We don't see many of those. And again, they're going to be subject to these new standards and modeling requirements that are going to require review by the staff and also USGS.
And so a regular well in someone's yard.
Okay. That
would never be,
Is
that would
exempt.
never trigger exempt, right?
Well, yeah, if you have a house and you want to put a well in, you don't apply to the commission for that.
Just wanted to make sure that
These
these
are-
are being added.
These are commercial.
These are large.
Okay.
Yeah, you would be looking at probably 20 houses on a community system. 20, 25 houses on a community system to need a well of this size.
Thank you.
Is there any thought, or is phasing that in instead of going up for 300 percent all months?
Well, no, I mean, the rule would, as proposed, would require that fee for, for any new application that comes. Anyone who's already in progress, obviously that's not going to be impacted.
Well, I think what Jay's saying is, yeah, it's, over a 3-year period or 5-year period to get to 6,000, you could mention that, and that would be taken under consideration.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
You know,
obviously, yeah,
So,
any comment, yeah, I'm just saying the rule right now doesn't contemplate that.
right,
But if that were a comment that somebody like you or another town wanted to make, we would consider that and have the commission consider that and respond either by amending the rule or not. But again, for the most part, these are not existing homes that we're talking about. It's not
No,
a single commercial use. These are large withdrawals. And
but these large withdrawals apply to like the American Water and these companies who ultimately would pass it on to the residential customer.
yes, whoever their customers are, absolutely. And this is also a fee.
Or municipal water companies
It could
too.
be a municipality, could be an MUA. This is the fee that we mentioned before, which is based on construction costs. It generates about $300. That hasn't been increased since 2004. So we're talking about a long time that the commission's been requiring this very small amount that isn't even close to equating to the review time and cost that goes into it. So that is part of the thinking, is that we need to have a fee for these larger wells that is much more in line with the work that's required to review them.
Well, I know with towns, we can only increase fees like 10%, I believe. So, we go that route, saying or Jay saying over a period of time to increase those fees to be more palatable, I guess.
300 to 1,000.
Right. I mean, the commission does every 4 or 5 years, look at all of its fees and make a series of increases. This is not one that we've increased ever since 2004, so that is partly why the jump seems bigger. But again, yeah, I mean, the commission's not subject to that same 10% requirement that you're talking about. And it's not something we do all that often either, so, but yeah, I mean, comments are welcome. I mean, if we can go back and certainly take all of those under consideration and run the analysis to show exactly how much, time and how many hours the staff is spending reviewing to, really provide the justification that's necessary. So far that, it's just the proposal.
Anyone else have any questions? This time, obviously this plan amendment will be public. You'll be able to go online and access it and have your local municipal engineers or your
Yeah.
people look at that.
And we have, we sent out the amendments, the proposal to MUAs specifically, right? Counties, municipalities, engineers, trying to make sure we were getting information to the true interested parties in this case. And the rules on the website, you can submit your comments through the website as well. Email them separately or fax them, or however you'd like to get them to us. Or, yeah, as Gina said, if you have questions, you can, if your engineers have questions, they can call Gina directly and ask and make sure we get all the questions answered.
What time is the public hearing? 12.
It is at 9:30. It's a virtual hearing, so no need to drive to the Yes, well, for you it would be easy, but we have found that with the virtual public hearings, we do tend to get a few more people than we would if we had it in the evening at the office, and we never seem to generate much attendance. So.
Okay, any other on the line? Anybody? No further questions? So we want to thank you, Gina, and look forward to following this process through.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next, we're going to go to our guest speaker, the DEP. And who?
Nancy Kemple. There she is.
Yep.
Still here?
You are on.
You're on.
Okay. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to leave my camera on. I think I'm going to turn it off and just do the slideshow. I don't know if that messes anything up.
It doesn't.
Okay, good. Since I'm home running on the laptop, it just has a tendency to overheat, so I don't want that to happen.
Okay, looks good.
Okay, slides are up. Okay.
Yeah, good.
So, good evening, everyone. My name's Nancy Kemple. I'm the section chief over the MS4 permitting program in the Bureau of Egyptes, Stormwater Permitting and Water Quality Management. So I have a bunch of slides, but I will go over them quickly. However, if I do bring something up and you had questions, please feel free to, ask questions, or you can email me after the presentation if you had anything else that you wanted to follow up on. I will be touching on the new and revised permit conditions from the current Tier A permit. Then I will go over some background on the Tier B reassignments. I will touch very briefly on the stormwater utility guidance that we have posted on our website and the technical assistance program that we have for towns that are interested in investigating whether or not they would benefit from forming a stormwater utility. And that technical assistance program is offering through the department's chosen, right now we have a list of a few approved consulting firms that they would prepare free comprehensive feasibility studies for those interested in forming the stormwater utilities. And also, I didn't want to forget that I will also touch a little bit on the Tier B reassignment, the upcoming funding opportunities. They are not ready to be published yet, not finalized, but I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. So for the first part, I'm going to go over the Tier A renewal permit, the new and revised permit conditions. So the first is we're requiring still from the existing permit, the stormwater pollution prevention plan to be prepared and kept on file and posted on the town's website. The changes is that we're proposing with this permit is that we're requiring the SP3, which we call it, to be submitted electronically to the department and then posted on a dedicated stormwater webpage. We're also requiring that municipalities, as I just mentioned, create a municipal stormwater webpage. We have created an HTML template within the department, within our bureau, and we have it, and we have staff that are able to work with your web people if needed to have these, to use this template and work on getting all of these required materials to be posted in one place. Just for a little background, this was an optional activity under the public education and outreach section. However, there were very few municipalities that took advantage of it, and we had received a number of complaints or questions back from citizens and other people looking at the town's websites, not being able to find certain documentation. So that was the rationale behind this. So as you see, as I go through on the slides, I have noted the permit section where these requirements are. So you certainly can go into the permit and read through for the actual text in the permit for the full requirement. So not new to the Tier A permit, but we did make some modifications to the post-construction stormwater management in new development and redevelopment section. This is basically for major developments. Continuing the requirement that stormwater design reviewers must attend the free DEP SWIMDER training, as we call it, every 5 years. We have a website up where we announce the trainings that are upcoming, and you can go to that website to check that out, or you can email me or the department at stormwatermanager@dep.nj.gov for upcoming information. We usually hold the course twice per year, once in the spring and once in the fall. There is also a new requirement in the permit where the department is anticipating amendments to the stormwater management rules. And if and when they happen, we're requiring that all of the design reviewers that are certified under the SWIMDER course itself take an update training, which would probably be just a few hours. And we would announce that once an amendment was adopted to, excuse me, to the rules, and the engineers and design reviewers would have 12 months to take that training. And then we would, along with that, we would certainly be announcing it through the engineers and the stormwater program coordinators. We also made a clarification in the permit that the same person cannot design and approve their own stormwater management designs, which was already, I guess, mentioned in the rule, but we clarified it in the permit. So we're also adding 2 new ordinances to the renewal permit. One is for the towns to adopt an ordinance to regulate privately owned salt storage locations. For instance, if you have a shopping center, mini mall, industrial complex where they have their own salt storage, they should be held to the same requirements that the municipalities are held to. They should have to cover it and restrict the runoff from entering the MS4. So we are preparing the draft ordinance for towns, or for a model ordinance for the towns to use. We're also preparing a tree removal replacement ordinance similar to what many towns have adopted under the Arbor Day Foundation for Tree Cities. Basically, this would require that if certain size trees are removed, that a certain number of trees, even if it's a smaller diameter, be planted in replacement of that. So that model ordinance is also being drafted right now. We've revised the street sweeping requirements in the Tier A permit. The permit right now requires, in the current 2018 permit, it requires that monthly sweeping be conducted in areas that are primarily commercial with inlets and curbs, and certain restriction on the speed limit. In the renewal permit, because the permit really needed clarification with what was primarily commercial, we were also missing a number of roads that were contributing to water quality problems, that we've reduced the frequency to either once per year or 3 times per year, basically depending on whether or not those street segments have storm drain inlets that discharge to surface water. If they do have the storm drain inlets, those segments of roads would need to be swept every 4 months. And If they did not have storm drain inlets that discharged to surface water, the sweeping requirement would be annual. One clarification that we realized that we need to put in the final renewal permit is that this condition only applies to paved roads, asphalt and concrete, not gravel, sand, gravel, or tar and chip roads. So this next requirement regarding storm drain inlets has been in both the Tier A and Tier B permits since 2004, then requiring towns to retrofit all municipal storm drains that basically came in contact with road improvement projects. The requirement was either to bolt on a plate on the vertical opening of the inlet to reduce the size of the material that could make it through, or replace the entire storm drain inlet. So in this renewal permit, since this has been a requirement for so many years that we're requiring by the end of this permit cycle, which we expect will be December 2027, that all remaining municipal storm drain inlets will have been retrofitted in the same way, either with the simple bolt-on plate, or of course with a replacement of the whole new inlet would be acceptable as well. We have a requirement in the permit. We had to do some clarification on this, but the basic point for the herbicide application management is to ensure that the towns prohibit unnecessary spraying of herbicides. We do have some reports of probably more on the highway agencies, but where they turn the sprayer on and just drive, whether there's weeds in the medians or not, and they're spraying the concrete and the storm drain inlets, and it's just causing more herbicide to be washed into the surface waters. And we're also trying to avoid the devegetation that might result once an area is barren, and you get the erosion, which also causes problems in the receiving waters. We've added a new requirement in this permit, was also included in the highway agency permit, which was renewed in 2020, for piles of excess road salt and de-icing materials that have been left behind on the roads during spreading operations to be scooped up and removed within 72 hours after the end of storm events, conditions permitting. Certainly, if the salt is at the bottom of a giant pile of snow and you don't see it until that pile has thawed and there's still salt left, that would be the appropriate time to scoop that up. One of the reasons that we're requiring this is the department has an extensive ambient surface water stream monitoring network. Over the years, the staff in that group have done trends analysis. While some pollutants in the surface waters may still be causing impairments, but we do see some minor improvements. The converse is true for the salt. We are seeing an increase in basically the salinization of our fresh waters, and that is something that we need to hopefully reverse the trend and start to reduce the salt levels in the streams, or we're going to end up removing all of the freshwater aquatic species and other organisms in the streams. So there's some that are more sensitive to this, but we're trying to get a handle on that and not control the salt that's being spread, certainly, but to deal with what's unnecessarily left behind. Another requirement that's currently in the permit but needed some clarification, that we're regulating roadside vegetative waste management, basically tree trimming, chipping, grass clippings, trying to keep them out of the roadway and away from being washed into the MS4 they get washed down into the stream and they are causing, they have the potential to cause negative stream impacts. They can cause eutrophication, and all other sorts of unwanted negative impacts on the stream. So trying to do whatever we can while, you have employees out there doing grass cutting or tree trimming, chipping, to keep those materials up in the grass or out, up along the tree line and not in the street. We're also adding back in the roadside erosion control requirement. This was in, I believe, the 2004 permit. It was removed inadvertently because there was some misunderstanding about how this was enforced and whether it was the soil conservation district requirements that were already in place. So it was brought to our attention basically that the roadside erosion is not something that is administered through the soil conservation district. And since the roads are part of your MS4 conveyance system, that it was appropriate to put it back in the permit. We're basically asking to check for areas where you're seeing stormwater erosion on the edges of the roads and washing down sedimentation, just soil, road debris. And this can be done, just as a drive-by inspection, and can be done with other storm drain, inlet, other types of municipal inspections. And then the permit is right now worded to require repair of these problems within 90 days of discovery. We do understand that there can be situations like in the picture here that 90 days is not going to come close to enough time to repairing that. But at least to start, if at 90 days isn't a viable date, that you would reach out to the department and explain the situation and provide us with a estimated date. So we've done some reconfiguring of the permit where it comes to the proper operation and maintenance of stormwater infrastructure. For instance, the storm drain inlets, we separated out and clarified that the storm drain inlets are separate from the catch basins and that the inlets should be inspected. All of them should be inspected every year. That basically can be a drive-by as long as the inlets aren't covered with debris and clogged. And then that the catch basins, the way the permit was proposed, although we have received some comments on this, that if a municipality has less than 1,000 catch basins, that all of those catch basins would be inspected every year. And if you had more than 1,000, that it would inspect 1,000 or 20% of the, of the total, whichever is more, would be every year on a rotational basis. So, and that while the permit doesn't have specifics on when catch basins need to be cleaned, EPA did comment on this condition in the other permits, and requested that we include a requirement in the permit to refer to their guidance document on at what depth of debris catch basins should be cleaned, and that from EPA, that is at about 40%, where the catch basin ceases to catch basically the solids that are flowing down with the stormwater. So we've included a requirement in the permit to identify all stormwater conveyance features and to inspect, clean, and maintain them, make sure that they are able to convey the stormwater and you don't end up with roadside or other localized flooding because of poor maintenance and, clogging of those conveyance systems. So lastly, in that section, we've added a requirement that any stormwater that wasn't already specifically identified, such as conveyance or the catch basins, that they be inspected at least 4 times annually and after any rainstorms that exceed an inch. And that the towns maintain and clean them as needed so that they are sure to operate properly during the next rain. So this is a requirement that's been in the Tier A and B permits, but we've added some clarification to this as well. The municipalities are required to ensure that stormwater facilities that are not owned or operated by the municipality are inspected and maintained by those owners, and that those owners perform all their annual inspections and maintenance. Ensure that the trash, litter, excess leaves, anything like that is removed to make sure that the basins or whatever infrastructure it is able to operate properly during storm events. We've seen some towns require their private owners to fill out a form every year certifying that they've completed this and send that form back into the towns. Other towns conduct the inspections themselves. We've seen that where they've required fees by these private owners to be paid to pay for their inspections. So we've seen a few different variations on how this is handled in different municipalities. So we've also added some additional items that need to be controlled at municipal maintenance yards. For the most part, this has stayed pretty much intact, but the goal is to keep all of the material covered and not exposed to stormwater, to ensure that you don't have any contaminated stormwater runoff from any of this. I think we added cold patch asphalt, basically requirements to keep everything covered, and certain requirements that constitute waste have to be removed within 6 months, or else the solid waste rules kick in. We've enhanced the employee training requirements in the permit as well. The permit right now, the 2018 permit, requires some items be trained on every year and other items every other year. It was a little bit contradictory because some of the requirements that were every other year were already contained in the requirements that we required training on every year. So there was a little bit of inconsistency in the permit. We clarified that basically the training should occur every year for the basic employee training. As I mentioned before, we have the SWIMDER training for the design reviewers, and we offer that free. We're going to offer the stormwater rule amendment training free as well, and we will email out the dates for those trainings as we already do, and we will have them posted on the website. We are creating a new stormwater, program coordinator training for all stormwater coordinators, and that they will be required to take the training every 5 years, basically during each permit cycle. And then there's the municipal board and governing body member training, which basically requires if you've probably familiar with the asking the right questions video, which has been posted on the website. And then every term after that, after they've watched that, then those members could view any of the other videos on the website. The renewal permit is also going to require additional mapping. We're on top of the outfall mapping that was required of the Tier A municipalities under the current permit. We're asking for all infrastructure to be mapped so that we can identify sources of problems, sources of illicit discharges from outfalls, problems in the receiving streams, also locations with flooding that help you identify, areas where you can remediate those problems. This map is required to be submitted to the department electronically as a georeference shapefile. We have our free mapping application, which we have a link on our website and here on the slide, and that this map would then be posted on the dedicated stormwater webpage. This mapping is not due until 3 years after the effective date of the permit authorizations, which we are hoping they will be effective this January 1st. That would mean that you would have 3 years from January 1st or January 2026 to have these maps in. We are also more than willing to come out to the municipalities for to help with training on how to use the mapping app, to help towns get started. We would, usually even, start with mapping some of the locations in the town. We have staff in the Bureau that are able to provide whatever guidance you might need. And the ArcGIS licenses are available free for municipalities to use to conduct this mapping. We are enhancing the layers that are available on that right now to accommodate the extra infrastructure that'll be mapped through this requirement. But if you have any interest in obtaining any of those free ArcGIS licenses, if you're or training or any other questions on the mapping, you can definitely reach out. There's a link on the webpage there. You can also just email me, and we'd be more than happy to have any one of us come out and provide the training. So this is a requirement in the current permit to conduct the outfall inspections. We have just enhanced it a little bit to provide some clarification. For existing tier A's, all of the outfalls were required to be mapped by December 2020. Some towns are still working on that, but as you're inspecting them, or as you're mapping them, you can also be conducting the inspections to determine that they're in good shape, that you don't have stream scouring. And what we're asking is that if a municipality has less than 100 outfalls, that they inspect them once, I believe that's once a year, and that if you have more than 100, that you would inspect, similar to the catch basins, that you would inspect 100 or 20% of the total, whichever is more, on a rotational basis. And then also the requirement to inspect any new or newly identified outfalls that you just found. There's a lot of instances where municipalities just didn't know locations of some of their outfalls, but that they would be inspected within 30 days, and that any complaints or reports of illicit connections or scouring also be investigated within 30 days. Very similar to the previous slide. When you were doing the outfall inspections, you also, for stream scouring and just proper functioning, we would also have you do the illicit discharge detection inspections on basically the same schedule, investigate any complaints, dry weather flows within 30 days, and remediate any illicit connections within 12 months. Some cases require more time than that to finish either the investigation or the resolution. So if you know, as you're getting close to the end of that 12 month, that you need additional time, to just go ahead and reach out to us and let us know, and with some sort of projected schedule, how you plan to continue working through that. So the watershed improvement plan is new to the Tier A permit. Was similar, or I guess an enhancement of the requirement in the existing Tier A permit for the municipalities to identify their TMDLs through our TMDL lookup tool and schedule maintenance measures and inspections according to areas that had been identified as having existing TMDLs or total maximum daily loads for parameters that are deemed to be impaired in those water bodies. Some of that permit language also required that the towns try to develop strategies to improve their discharges to help improve the TMDL or water quality impairment situation. So this is building on that requirement, but also looking at areas to reduce or eliminate flooding, and ultimately to develop a plan with input from the residents in the area, businesses, and as well as other dischargers within your town and neighboring discharges that might be in the same water body. So phase 1 of the watershed improvement plan is, for the most part, a mapping requirement, which is approximately half of the mapping requirements is also available on the department's GIS database, but you would just at that point go in and find the information that pertain to your town. There's other information that would have to be completed by the town that the department doesn't have information on, such as drainage areas that apply to your separate storm sewer outfalls. That would be done, it would be done in conjunction with the other mapping requirement, and that phase 1 is due 3 years after the effective date of the permit. Then phase 2 is basically a requirement to prepare and submit a watershed assessment report and conduct outreach, basically looking at areas in your town where you could identify improvements or best management practices that could be implemented to help reduce the discharge of pollutants through your MS4. And then phase 3 of the watershed improvement plan would be basically to finalize that watershed improvement plan with chosen implementation of projects that, with a schedule of when you thought you would be able to implement them, what it would cost, what other agencies, regulatory agencies you coordinated with. And so that hopefully we would look to see that all of these would be done across the state roughly at the same time at the end of the permit cycle, and different communities that discharge into the same water bodies would be able to at least coordinate, cooperate, and find projects. Could be any number of things that could be done to reduce the discharge of pollutants from the MS4s. So in conjunction with this, we're developing a template for the watershed improvement plans so that all of the plans across the state would look the same. If you were looking at your neighbors or upstream or downstream or across the river from you, that you would be able to find the same type of information in the same location. And that would also be prompted with some language and explanation about what would go in each section. So we are preparing that and hoping to have it done. I would love to have it done by the time the permit is issued, but there's only so much time, so it'll probably be available right shortly after the permit is issued. And then, as usual, in the permits, we do require that all copies of all related materials be kept for at least 5 years. The annual report will still need to be submitted by May 1st of every year. The Tier A permittees are required to submit a supplemental questionnaire with their annual report. We're also asking that the current stormwater pollution prevention plan be attached, as well as any illicit discharge elimination reports. If you had found an illicit discharge and conducted any investigation, those reports would also be submitted along with your annual report. So change from the current permit, we have eliminated some of the attachments to the permit and incorporated those requirements into the actual permit, the body of the permit itself. So the public education and outreach will now be attachment A, and the design standards for the storm drain inlets, which I think was previously attachment B, attachment C is now attachment B, and that they are now the only attachments that will be with the permit when it's issued. So I don't know if this is a good time to stop if anybody had questions on the Tier A renewal itself.
Anybody have any questions at this point?
I do, actually.
Sure.
I've almost all the way back to the beginning, you mentioned, I think it was a new requirement for some sort of tree removal or tree replacement ordinance.
Yes.
What would that apply to? What kind of, is that for all major development, or what would that be?
So it would be similar to the requirements that are, or not the requirements, to the ordinances that some towns have already adopted. But if a healthy tree above a certain size is to be cut down could be a major development, could be a homeowner, that would necessitate the replacement of either one similarly sized tree or more than one, obviously, smaller sized trees. So we're trying, we are drafting the template of this model ordinance right now, and we have been reviewing ordinance that have been established by other communities. So we're trying to make it, we're certainly not burdensome for people that are cutting down dead trees, diseased trees, invasive trees, but to keep the, healthy trees in the community. They're valuable to keeping the water resources in, soil from, restricting soil erosion and protecting groundwater. So they were some of the, I guess, the basis for the requirements. I'm trying to just look here quickly to see if I have any additional information for you on that.
Okay, well, I don't expect you to know all the details off the top of your head. I was just intrigued. It is something that a number of the commissioners have been interested in discussing, a sort of no net loss of trees program in the Pinelands, and how would we go about applying or enforcing something like that. And we're talking about it mostly in association with the new development applications, for a new subdivision or a new warehouse or whatever it is, not so much, existing homeowners removing a couple of trees in their backyards. I know that there are a lot of towns that have ordinances like that. So I'd be interested in learning more about where you're headed with that and any kind of model ordinances. We would certainly want to see.
Sure.
Get down to the towns, especially the Pinelands towns.
Yeah, because you have.
Because they won't, I'm 100% guaranteed they won't work within our rules. So I just want to make sure that we have a chance to talk to you all about that and see where you're headed and what might be covered by this particular requirement.
Absolutely.
We're already planning to have a discussion of the tree removal replacement issue on Friday at our climate committee meeting, so we'll try and get some more information before then, I think.
Well, how does that fall with like the gypsy moth and the lanternflies that are killing these trees? Do they have to be replaced?
Not a commission requirement, but I don't know, you know, that to me is a little bit different than a developer coming in and saying, I need to clear 5 acres of trees for my warehouse. That's the kind of thing that I was talking about, the commission might have an interest in regulating or requiring, you know, replanting or something, but the issue of removing dead or diseased trees or,
Will the management plan?
yeah, I mean, those are not things that the commission regulates directly,
So
so I don't
with
know.
DEP,
I don't know.
how does that come into play?
So I'm sorry, it was a little bit garbled. Was there a specific question for?
With all the gypsy moth issues, especially in our town, and the lanternfly issues, and the trees are dropping, do those trees have to be replaced in people's yards?
So the the ordinance itself was not going to require that disease or, you know, dead or diseased trees be replaced. But if it, you know, the town could establish an area where if you had to take down trees in your yard that weren't diseased, that maybe there's areas of the town that they want planted so the trees could be replaced in a different location. But the goal with the ordinance was never to have trees, to require that dead or diseased trees be replaced with, or even the invasive species, you know, where a lot of towns and homeowners might be trying to take down some of their trees that are the, you know, especially the trees of heaven that are the, you know, great habitat for the lanternflies. That I know that's something that I've heard people, you know, trying to rally against to clean them off of their properties. But that, so we were trying, I don't think that the ordinance was going to require dead, diseased, or invasive species to be replaced. It's really looking for the larger established trees to try and maintain the, you know, some level of tree canopy in the town. So you could replace it in a different location.
So now, I know you're going to go into this tier B reassignments, but for the towns that have been switched over to tier A from tier B and going through like everything that you just went through, is there going to be any funding from the state to give to the towns to
So I can,
hire all these people that have to do all this extra work now?
so I can start with that. I don't have a slide because it is not finalized. But there was funding available to the tier A municipalities when they were first permitted. And although I wasn't in the program back then, it was $40,000 was given to each tier A municipality to basically get started and develop their tier A program. What we are planning to do, hopefully in the next few months, we were hoping it would be done before the permit was finalized, but things just seem to take longer than expected always. But to have a grant program announced for the tier B municipalities that would be a non-competitive grant. It would be based on certain milestones being met in under the tier A permit, basically the for under their compliance schedule for the new tier A permittees. And if the value is not finalized, so I couldn't tell you that, but the goal was to make it commensurate with the $40,000 that was offered back in 2024 to those tier A municipalities back then, and with some increase to account for the, you know, inflation, cost of living.
Okay, and this isn't going to be like a matching grant. This is going to be a regular grant that, I mean, and we're not going to have to put out all the money first and like get reimbursed, are we?
So I do think, I'm not 100% how this is going to work, but I do believe that it has to be staged so that certain milestones would have to be met, and which would probably require some expenditure of resources. I couldn't tell you because none of this has been finalized, but there would have to be certain milestones met and then a check would be cut. And then I think right now it might be in maybe just 2 or 3 phases. And this is, these are requirements that we're being given from our financial folks, that we can't just go out and issue checks for 40 or so $1,000 without any requirements on them. So we're trying to make the milestones and the application process as simple as possible. We were willing to help any municipality, complete their application. We're trying to keep it as a non-competitive grant, which means we don't have to go through the federal or the higher level of application review. So we're hoping that this application is very simple. You will not need to hire an engineer to complete it. And if you need help completing it, we in our stormwater program would be more than happy to help you complete those applications, short of signing them for you.
All right, so you'll come down and help the clerks out, right? Is that what
Maybe,
you're
maybe a Teams meeting, but I think we want to design the application to be as simple as possible. We want all of the Tier B municipalities to be able to avail themselves of this money. We're designing it so that there is there's enough money in this fund to give every Tier B municipality the same amount of money. So we really do want to get it out there and help municipalities comply with the permits. And granted, I don't think that the 50, 40, whatever number it's going to be, $1,000 is enough to finish everything. But we're hoping that it's enough to make a big dent and get started. And hopefully we will be, additional funding will be made available to us in the future, but that has not, we haven't received any information about that yet. Does that basically answer your question?
It does. It does.
Okay. So that was actually the first thing I was going to bring up. But we don't have the actual dollar amounts yet or the particulars. Once this is finalized, we will email everybody that has signed up, either town engineers, the stormwater control program coordinators, mayors. We're going to try and get the word out to as many contacts as we can for the municipalities. So hopefully we have all the accurate information, but I'm sure that the information will get out there and word will spread pretty quickly. We were hoping to have it done already, but it is just a slower process than we expected. And our program, at least for the people that are in the program now, have not been trained in how to go through this process. So it's been a little bit of a learning curve for us.
When do you anticipate this being finalized?
Our hope was by the end of the year or shortly thereafter.
And you're not gonna hire any extra help for the township?
Hire extra.
Yeah, I don't think they have the manpower to do what you're asking them to do.
You mean,
No, they're requiring you to do it.
I know,
Well,
but it's more money out of your pocket to hire people to do it.
I understand that.
Engineer, the township engineer is not gonna say, oh yeah, we have plenty of time, we'll do
This is the
it.
whole concern that we've been trying to convey. I mean, are you still, you're going to make the presentation? On the
Yes.
Tier B? Yeah, so we'll have some questions at the end. That's
Okay.
good for our presentation.
Thank you. So just to get started, here is a map showing in yellow all of the municipalities in the state that were assigned to Tier B. So you can see from the map that the majority of them are in, as expected, in the more rural areas in the northwest area of the state, in the Pinelands, and roughly in the center, and then down along Delaware Bay. So where they were mostly concentrated. I'm sorry. So just for a little background, the MS4 permitting program, at least the Tier A permitting program, is required by both federal and state regulations. There's a distinction between the Tier A and the Tier B. The Tier A permit is equivalent to the federal small MS4 permit. The Tier B permit is a New Jersey state-only permit and is not recognized by EPA and is not cannot incorporate water quality-based requirements, which we would base on the Federal Clean Water Act and other permits. Because it's not a federal permit, we don't have that ability, which is why these conditions were not in the Tier B permits previously. So the MS4 permitting program began to address water quality problems that the governments were seeing from stormwater runoff from different, from municipalities. We also permit highway agencies separately, public complexes separately. Across the country, you see the MS4 permits issued to different entities, but it's basically the same program. So prior to reassignment, there were 101 Tier B municipalities, and the concern with those and some of the rationale behind the reassignment is that there were concerns with the discharges of common stormwater pollutants to the surface waters in the state that already had what I mentioned before, these total maximum daily loads developed for them, which are basically models. Some are complex and some are more simplistic, to identify areas that are contributing pollutants and causing water quality impairments in those streams. The impairments are basically evaluated. Water quality sampling is evaluated against the surface water quality standards that are in the regulations. And if the values for those pollutants are above the surface water quality standards, those segments of those streams are designated as impaired. And then once they're impaired, the department is obligated under the federal program under EPA to prioritize those waters and develop total maximum daily loads, which not only identify the causes, but also identify how much reduction in those pollutants need to happen for the streams to come back into compliance with the standards. Other water quality concerns we had were the harmful algal blooms and MS4's discharging into sensitive water bodies in the state. Excuse me. So the federal regulations require us to periodically reevaluate our MS4 program and our designations. So during the renewal of the 2018, the current Tier A permit, EPA questioned us as to when we were going to conduct the reevaluation. It did not happen during the 2018 renewal. And subsequently, EPA has been asking us and pretty much putting us on notice that we had to go through and conduct this reevaluation. Under the reevaluation, there's a number of conditions that we look at. One is population. There are certain requirements in the federal rules that are they're very cut and dry. If a town has more than 1,000 residents, in their census designated urbanized area, that area must be permitted under the small MS4 program, which in New Jersey is the Tier A permit. We also look at water quality and other stormwater related issues. For instance, is there potential for the MS4 discharges to result in exceedances of the water quality standards, which are the impairments and affect the designated uses? We look to see if there are discharges into waters with harmful algal blooms, if there are any other discharges causing significant concerns for any of the sensitive waters, such as the freshwater 1 categories in the state, Pinelands waters, with trout waters, which is for the most part in the northern part of the state. So all former Tier B towns have waters either within or bordering their towns that have water quality impairments and or TMDLs, which was the first thing that we looked at when we went through this reevaluation. There are also 82 of the 101 towns that also have sensitive waters within or bordering their town with classifications for freshwater 1 or Pinelands, which are the 2 outstanding national resource waters in the state that are to be protected against any man-made discharges, and then the trout production or trout maintenance waters. Some of these towns also had experienced HABs in their receiving waters. And then on top of that, oh, excuse me, I'm going to go back. On top of that, we also had to reevaluate the towns based on their populations in their urbanized areas. And there were 11 of the Tier B towns that had exceeded the populations based on the 2010 census. We are still waiting for the census numbers, excuse me, for the 2020 census. But at this time, we are 12 years overdue with our reevaluation based on the 2010 census. So just a quick look here. We conducted an evaluation of where all of the impaired waters were in the state, and for those impaired waters, where the TMDLs had been developed. So on the left, you can see we color coded some of the impaired waters based on the parameters. There were some temperature impairments in the northern part of the state, not too many in the south. There are pH impairments in the Pinelands areas, as well as nutrients and some pathogens. And then these are for the impairments that have not had TMDLs developed for them. And then the map on the right shows where the areas where TMDLs have been developed to address those impairments. And then with not the greatest color combination, we combined those 2 coverages to see where in the state was not affected by impairments or TMDLs. And you can pretty much see from that map in the middle that there is really no area in the state that is completely exempt from either the impairments or the TMDLs. So the second thing that we looked at was the locations of all of the sensitive waters in the state. You can see our Pinelands waters are noted in green. The freshwater 1 streams in the Pinelands area are also Pinelands waters, but also FW1. which if FW1 and Pinelands basically have the highest protection levels in the state. The blue denotes category 1 streams. They're denoted that way because they have some exceptional ecological significance, also for trout production waters and for drinking water supplies. They are the most common reasons the streams are classified as category 1. And then in the red are the trout maintenance waters, which of the sensitive waters in the state, they are the have the lowest protection level. The water bodies in the rest of the state are either saline, they're usually designated as either freshwater 2 or saline estuary waters. So we looked at the areas where these sensitive water bodies were located and then compared them with the impairments and the TMDLs. And you can see that even though these waters are to be protected and had the highest level of protection in the state, that they're still not exempt from impairments and TMDLs. So when we completed that review, like I said before, we found that there were no Tier B towns that were not affected by either impairments or TMDLs, on top of the fact that 82 of the 101 have some of these sensitive water bodies within or bordering their town. So I'm sorry, before I move on, I know there were a lot of questions about the reassignment, so I thought I would pause here.
My question is, the state wants to regionalize in so many different avenues. Why aren't they regionalizing with this? When you have the 21 counties versus the 564 municipalities, why wouldn't they just regionalize with this? Instead of making the towns go through this?
Well, the regulations that we have in place for the MS4 program do not, they're not set up to regulate the counties or any other regional breakdown. They're set up based on municipalities. And this is something that I can't tell you why it was done back in almost 20 years ago. This is just the regulatory setup that we have right now.
Could you change it?
I don't know. The other
Process, I mean, that would be the time.
Well, some of the other problems would not be able to be regulated at the county level or another regional level, like your major development reviews against the stormwater management regulations are done on a municipal level. And
well, you would just follow the guidelines, kind of like what we do with Pinelands.
so that
You just have to, you have to report it to the county. I mean, they would come through and get all their permits and everything, but we have to abide by whatever the county was saying.
I don't know that would be something that would, it's not something that we could do now. It's certainly something that we could consider, but that would mean that the development in the towns would be controlled at the county level. And that wasn't something that I guess appealed to many of the towns back in 2002 or 2003 when they were drafting the regulations. And so I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
I mean, just to add to it, then the municipalities that are in Pinelands should be controlled by Pinelands. They control our development as it is. They're our planning board now, so to speak. So maybe, and the Highlands could take care of the Highlands.
Just trying to simplify things.
Well, unfortunately, the EPA doesn't delegate below the state level. So they would not be delegating the administering the MS4 program down to that level. It would be, the state still would be issuing the permits. If towns wanted to have a regional authority in charge of all of their stormwater requirements, that I guess that is something that could be investigated, but it's not something that we can do now.
What I think you should do is continue on your presentations, because I don't want, well, with the few people we do have, I don't want to lose. So at least complete that. And then, I mean, it's obviously, this is an important topic. It's a topic that I think, you know, municipalities should be well aware of, particularly, you know, in our case, in Pinelands. And obviously, you know, is there any overlaps, or there's things that, you know, maybe the Pinelands objects to, I don't know. But obviously, if you could just finish your presentation and then, you know, and then we'll take it from there. Because,
One thing to keep in mind is, I mean, we're gonna have the recording of this presentation, and we'll be able to post on our website and distribute to all the towns, just to.
right, and hopefully this material that was presented tonight will be part of it, right? Yeah.
Sure, I'll keep going. The one thing that I did want to point out is that we have done other outreach presentations over the last year, and those presentations are also, I don't think they're recordings of the presentations, but the PowerPoint slides, excuse me, are available on our website too, if anybody.
You made some presentations?
I'm sorry?
When did you start making? Well, let's just finish.
Okay, I just wanted to share that there's other presentations that we have available, but they're just not the recordings like this. So, okay, so I just wanted to touch a little bit, because I know we had learned of some interest in towns across the state. Just to share that in 2019, the legislature passed the Stormwater Utilities Act and required the department to develop guidance for towns or counties or other entities to form stormwater utilities. So that guidance was posted on the website in 2021, and the department now has a pot of money available to offer to municipalities, counties, or other entities that were authorized under the act to form a stormwater utility, that we're offering technical assistance where our approved consulting firms would conduct a, comprehensive feasibility study for any of the entities that would be interested in looking into forming a stormwater utility, and that this technical assistance program is open right now for application until November 1st. It's basically just requiring a letter of interest, and then we will go through the evaluation criteria. So it was just a little bit of information about the guidance that is available on the website, goes through discussing the initial concept, conducting preliminary feasibility study. The comprehensive feasibility study is the piece that we are offering the technical assistance funding for now, and then moving on, engaging the stakeholders and public. So this stormwater utility technical assistance program is available right now. I've included the website on the bottom of the page in case anybody is interested. And that only requires a letter of interest to be submitted to the department. And the only requirement that for the program is that any applicant, whether it would be one municipality, more than one, a county, or any of the authorities, would designate a qualified person to cooperate with the consulting firm to gather information. Excuse me. So for the letter of interest, it's relatively simple. Would you have to explain, all of this information is available on the website as well, but just basically explain your commitment to forming a stormwater utility, attach any documentation if you've already started to look into it, include contact information for the liaison that would work with the consulting firm or any other employees or additional employees that you would have them work with. If it was going to be more than a municipality or a county, we ask that you provide a map of the area that would be the service area, and then just submit the letter signed by basically a ranking elected official, principal, executive officer, depending on the entity. And if you do this before November 1st. So this is the second extension on this funding program that we were able to offer. The first deadline was August 23rd, I believe. We extended it to September 23rd, and based on continued requests, we now have extended it to November 1st. I don't know, but I'm going to doubt that we would get another extension on this deadline. So just to let everybody know, and then some of the selection priorities that we would go through would be looking at overburdened communities of the applicants who will be serving the largest populations, who shows evidence of taking this as a regional approach, and who has begun a feasibility study already. I just need 1 second. Of course, my voice decides to go out just while we're doing this. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation.
Well, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to meet with us. And I think this is an important presentation. I think it's an important, regulations that's coming down. I think, just based on some of the discussions that was taking place, a lot of things are not in place, but yet we're trying to, adopt this by January 1st. I think we need to slow this process down a little bit and let some municipalities understand what their real obligations are going to be. It's a big change. I mean, from a municipality such as most of them that are in Pinelands, and I would think B's to A's, and then you're modifying the A regulations where a lot of these municipalities that are already designated as A's, they're finding out that they're going to have to be doing more than what they were doing in the past. So, it's just that, it's important. Water quality, obviously, storm management is very, very important. But and obviously, if you're looking at creating a utility, establishing a stormwater utility, I mean, I got rid of 2 utilities because they were becoming burdensome and costly and so forth. I got rid of 2 utilities. Now you're asking to, create a utility, which is going to be very, very costly to a municipality. And I think, it's a great concept to advance to the county. The county didn't create the utility. I think that's where the vice chair was talking about. I mean, that's an appropriate place to have the utility, have the county have the utility, and do in our case, our 16 municipalities. And I would encourage to see if you can get an extension for that, because, you know, I'm a little surprised that I heard that you're making presentations last year, but I've only learned about this stormwater management process again. Maybe the engineers are all aware of it, maybe all the planners and professionals, but as mayor, I just learned of this the last 35, 40 days ago. I so happen to be associated with both the Conference of Mayors and League of Municipalities. We just became aware of that stuff and it's become an issue. So, you know, I don't think we need to be, you know, in any combat situation between the DEP and municipalities and these associated Pineland. We just need to sit down and look at this thing and maybe just understand, you know, what everybody's going to have to be responsible for. And I think, you know, there's no question that stormwater management is important. The Pinelands has been advanced in it, you know, pretty much. I don't know if there's some overlapping things that, you know, could be waived in some of these, or the Highlands or the Pinelands in some of these different designated growth areas. But I really, you know, and then ordinances are going to have to be required to be adopted. Well, our ordinances that if it impacts the Pinelands, they have to review it first before we can, you know, I think before we can even introduce it, they have to review it. So I don't know how you know, how the DEP is going to just think that, you know, they're going to give us some model ordinance and adopt it, because it's got to go through, in our case, the Pinelands. I mean, if it's impacting the master plan and so forth, which this really is, right? This, yeah. So, you know, I really think that we,
Too aggressive.
well, you know, I think it's too aggressive because of we're all just learning about it. Now, I mean, the DEP apparently has been out, you know, out on the road show for the last year and a half. Now, I don't know about it, but I'm just saying, I mean, obviously you're a presenter, you're in the bureau, so you have a little bit of say. But I really think that, you know, we need, is the comment period, I think it's over now, right? Commenting on this plan, right?
The comment
So-
period,
Yeah, so you're getting, hopefully, you know, now, right, well, here, you need comment on, right? Did your municipality comment on? Are they aware? So that's what I'm trying to say, that you're getting a very, very low taste of what's out there. So I don't know where to go, you know, other than obviously, you know, we commented on it. We put our objections into it. You know, when you talk about municipalities, you know, that we've been a B and we've always had a population over 1,000. Now all of a sudden you're invoking the population rule when that was never, you know, part of it before. You know,
Even if you're under 1,000, you're still in tier A.
well, there's no,
So,
yeah, you're exactly, there's no going to be no other tiers. You're going to be in one lump area.
So the whole state of New Jersey is tier A.
Exactly. So, you know, you're seeing it firsthand. You have 7 municipalities. I guess there's 7. Out of the 7, how many are aware of this? Is there anybody that can respond?
This is Ken Weld from Marsh River.
Yeah.
I was aware of this. I actually met with the DEP probably 2 weeks ago with Gabe and Nancy.
2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
I'm talking about how long have you been aware of it?
it's
30
probably
days?
been about 4 months. No, it hasn't been that long.
Right.
But I personally jumped out in front of it, which I guess I was lucky there. But and I did partake in the public comment also. So, but I would like to say that the funding is a concern moving forward for Marsh River. It's the same thing I said during the meeting with Gabe and during the public comment. you know, it's great that there's grants going to be available up front for this program. But what about 5-10 years down the road? You know, Marsh River Township is 94 square miles and I have 4 public works employees. You know, so we're spread pretty thin. Grass cutting season, snow plowing season. We don't have a whole lot of downtime with that type of employee, but that number of employees. And you know, also I have a concern with the way the tiers were, where everyone, it's hard for me to swallow that everyone suddenly qualifies for tier A from tier B. So we were obviously painted with a broad brush, and that whenever that's done, someone suffers. And I really think it's the small municipalities that are suffering because the state, the DEP painted everyone with a broad brush. So that's my soapbox minute speech, and that's what I have. Thank you, Chairman.
Anyone else have any comment? So I mean, it's 9 o'clock. I know it's, you know, we started 7, so it's 3 hours of presentation. You know, is there any kind of feeling that this deadline is going to be pushed back, or are you on top? Or are you trying to go on target to adopt this by January 1st and designate everybody into the tier A?
Well, I think we are still hoping to have the permit renewal issued on, well, the master general permit issued by November 30th and have the authorizations issued by January 1st. One of the concerns that I have, and we did not set out knowing that we were going to have funding available, but now that we do, we also have a need to basically commit that funding. And if we don't move ahead with the tier B, you know, the authorizations for the tier Bs as new tier As, then the pot of funding that we have for those municipalities will likely be used by something else. So that would be one of the concerns that popped into my head, that if there was, I don't know what would be done regarding an extension or delay, but for the tier A permit itself, the permit expires December 31st. So part of our obligation with EPA is to keep our permits as current as possible. So that was the timeline for the renewal that pretty much dictated the timeline. I'm sorry?
Those that have been designated as A's all along, I see no problem with. I mean, you know, renewing their permits is the ones that it's the 100 and some that are trying to be moved over that I think should be given some, you know, leniency on the time frame, because I don't know how.
Well,
we're going to live up to that obligation. I really don't know. I mean, you're talking to somebody that's probably not even aware of it. So you know, they're going to, most of them are going to become aware of it when they get their violation notice in the mail. And that's when they're going to become aware. Yeah, that's what's going to happen. And that's what I'm trying to tell, you know. And,
right.
and that's when, you know, that's.
Can you imagine Washington, 102 square miles, and 600 people, and I think they have one public work.
Right, we have,
And I don't even know if they're aware of this.
It's part-time.
and that brings up another thing, you know, with the state funding, back to the pilot funding, you know, we're mainly state-owned lands in a lot of these towns. And they took 1/3 of our funding away. They were supposed to.
Give it
give
back, take it back.
You know, and here we are again, and the other thing is, it's not even been brought up to speed of where it is acreage wise. That kind of went by the wayside up with DEP.
2010, yes.
So, I mean,
DEP.
DEP, you know, like, all of a sudden stopped keeping track of it, and now there's all these more state-owned lands that we had sold off to the state and all these Pinelands towns, and we're getting crushed left and right. And I mean, our services, we have volunteer services in these small rural towns, that are going out, taking care of all these state-owned lands and, you know, fire engines and EMS and God
No,
forbid.
no, you have no regulations, it's all exempt. And then you get more and more requirements placed upon towns.
The towns can't do it. They just, I mean, they're basically, now when Mayor of Estelle Manor used to say, I'm turning the keys over to the state, you know, I mean, eventually that could happen with a lot of these small towns that just can't keep handling all these regulations because they don't have the manpower, they don't have the money to pay the people. So what do? And they can only raise the taxes so much before nobody's in the town and everybody sells their, I mean, unless, you know, the state obviously wants the towns, I mean, I don't know. It's a lot.
So,
When
and
we say small towns, we're not talking about area wide. You're talking 102 square miles for Washington Township.
We're 72
They
square
got
miles.
like 600 people. And that's what we need.
We have like 1,400, 1,500.
You
So-
can't really, what I'm saying, you can't really,
Well, I mean, she has a job to do,
Right.
so the whole point of it is though, I think, I mean, as a message or as the feedback to when you go back and to say, look, there's municipalities is just not aware of it. I mean, keeping with this schedule, I don't think it's going to, I think it's going to become a mess. I really do. Or non-compliance. That's what's really going to be. And I don't know if you know, I would try to work with municipalities to become compliant than non-compliant and try to get them to work with you.
I think we feel the same.
Pardon me?
I was gonna say, we feel we would like to be able to help municipalities in whatever ways that we can, at least partnering with trying to coordinate activities. A lot of the activities like street sweeping and even catch basin cleaning, things like that. If the requirements are only pertain to the municipal roads, not to the, you know, if there's state-owned roads, county roads, those roads, or even private development roads, those roads are not under your MS4 permit requirements. But also if the number of towns in the area have sweeping requirements, then I think we never intended for any one town to purchase a street sweeper or every town to
Well,
purchase a street
That's
sweeper.
what you're gonna, I mean, how are we gonna deal with that? Now that you're going to require there's street. There's not another municipality next door to me that has a sweeper that's saying you can borrow it.
Well, and
you're
so
talking about an expensive piece of equipment to sweep, you know, you're talking 72 miles township, you're talking, you know, miles. That it's gotta be a piece of equipment that's probably close to $1 million that's gonna have to work, you know, pretty much full time.
Right,
It's a
and
whole
if-
bunch of something that's bad.
So-
So,
in your case, it's maybe that 72 square miles is mainly county roads, same thing.
Right,
well,
yeah,
whatever,
no,
but some of them isn't, but I'm sure Morris River has a lot of road mileage that's not county.
And there's certainly areas where we can work to facilitate shared services if it was appropriate, neighboring municipalities, if any number of municipalities or county wanted to band together and purchase a sweeper or share services with municipalities that had a street sweeper, we would be more than willing to facilitate those conversations. Or even if it's the county sweeping their streets and then also
Well-
sweeping the streets in the municipality as a shared service.
So like prime example, like you just said, we're back to the county, you know, which would be simpler and. You know,
I couldn't tell you why the counties were not listed or permitted back 20 years ago. Was the way there were teams set up, working stakeholder groups set up for the development of the regulations. The regulations for the MS4 program were promulgated at the same time, pretty much, that the original Tier A and B permits were issued. And it wasn't just, I know I wasn't involved in it, but having read through some of the documentations, there were larger stakeholder groups that were involved in setting up the framework. So I'm going to guess that that was, I mean, we could look, but
I would use the example of solid waste. Back, I guess, when the 80s, when the state just said each county will be responsible for the solid waste of of the municipalities of the entire county. So we had to close our landfill, and every little town closed their landfill. It became a county solid waste authority, and they managed the solid waste plant.
And it could have had something to do with home rule too, with municipalities back then. And we were getting more money back then. Now we're just not getting the money like we used to. I mean, we had to close our school down because the formula didn't work out. So, I mean, this is what we're up against. It's less and less and less state funds coming into the small towns.
right.
Yeah, you're putting us into the same category as a Camden, as a Newark, and so forth. And we are not that. And how do you compete against that?
Right.
I mean,
So
that's what we are, Tier A. Tier A is with, whether you're discharging your stormwater into the ocean or into the lakes, or if you have nothing. So you've got to follow the same. So I don't know. It's just.
And you might have had it right the first time when you had Tier A versus Tier B, because when you're looking at the areas, I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like the bigger areas, were Tier A, and it seems like you had it right back then. But switching us all over to Tier A and dividing by the same rules as Newark and Camden is just.
So I think that the reduction or the lesser amount of infrastructure also was taken into account. Like, there's still impairments in the water bodies, and there's still TMDLs that were developed for the water bodies that flow through your towns or alongside your towns. And they are EPA. One of the things that they have been leaning on us to do is to address the implementation of the TMDLs and to restore all of the streams and water bodies back, as close as we can to the surface water quality standards, so that those waters can achieve all, there's a whole hierarchy of how that all works, but to achieve all of those designated uses. And that was part of the exercise that we went through, that we have some of the most sensitive water bodies and areas in the state in the Tier B municipality areas. And I don't think that we think you would develop a program that would look like Camden or Newark. I don't think that's what we envision at all, but that you have a reduced amount of residential areas, reduced amount of infrastructure, and that would correlate to a reduced obligation under the permit as well. So you would have less catch basins, less conveyance systems to inspect, less outfalls, and that if those frequencies were set appropriately, it would be a lesser obligation than some of the other municipalities that are already Tier A. We did have some very small towns also that had, for a variety of reasons, fell into the Tier A world back in 2004. So, and we do see a whole spectrum of, I would say, complexity of their MS4 programs in the towns. But just the fact that we do not have the legal basis to put requirements in the Tier B permit that would pertain to water quality. That is the reason for reassigning the municipalities, the Tier B municipalities to Tier A.
So basically it makes it easier for the state to apply with the federal government.
Well, we have the same water quality impairments and TMDLs in the Tier B municipalities, but we don't have a vehicle with the Tier B permit to have to require the towns to conduct activities, as simple as just having annual street sweeping or cleaning out catch basins to keep the solids from being transported into the streams. We don't have the authority to put that requirement in the Tier B permits. So that's, I'm not saying that, just explaining the rationale for why the Tier A is the vehicle. But certainly we do not see, the town Woodbine or Estelle Manor as equivalent to Newark or Camden. We certainly understand that the program would be a lighter version of a MS4 program in those towns, but basically covering some of the same topics. And the department is hoping, our goal is to improve water quality, but we're also hoping to be able to partner with all of the towns, whether it be the new Tier A's or former Tier A's that need assistance in areas. We are trying to work together to improve the water quality, and we would welcome and accept any requests for whatever assistance we can give on a day-to-day basis. We've helped municipalities create their stormwater pollution prevention plans. The case managers for the different counties have worked with municipalities. We're willing to facilitate conversations to look into shared services for some of the requirements in the permit as well. I don't know if you have any other suggestions that where we can help.
It's all good and so forth, but like you're saying, your staff's gonna have to come down, talk to our municipal clerk or to our foreman of our road department. And I don't know if he's gonna be able to comprehend that level of developing maps and all this stuff. It's gonna require,
An engineer.
some sort of a professional, and that's when they're gonna not need you. They're gonna say, I could do it, and, at $200 an hour, and that's what's gonna happen. You're not gonna be needed, because we're gonna have to hire a professional to do it. Especially where these small towns are. The jury's still out. I mean, I don't know. It's really challenging. And I really want to be nice about it, because I really do feel that, stormwater management is important, because there is, whether small or large towns are, they need some regulation. They need to be, following some kind of guidelines and so forth. But to this extent, which really, establishing right off the bat, establishing a stormwater utility tells me that's big business.
So
when they're establishing a utility to do something, this is not some mom-and-pop operation.
That is big business and costs money and intrusive into local government.
Sure. So I didn't mean to imply that we were expecting everybody would form a stormwater utility. We had just received some, information from various sources that there were maybe some towns in the Pinelands that might have been interested in looking into this. I just wanted to provide a little bit of information. It's certainly not a requirement. It's only information if anybody was interested in pursuing or even just simply investigating whether a utility would be the best way to go.
Well, how about if the Pinelands Division might look at forming a utility for its 53 municipalities? I mean, but we don't have enough time to, if this was advanced to us early on, I mean, we were talking about having the county do the utility, but I'm only, I'm trying to, head something off that, maybe there'd be some reason to slow the process down where we have other options or opportunities to at least, at least obtain what you're trying to do, but through, through a bigger organization that could, do something. I mean,
May I ask-
all municipalities such as mine and so forth, you're not gonna get in. We're gonna have to hire an engineer, period. My public works guys, that's not my job description. You're telling me to do this kind of stuff? The clerk's gonna say, what's this got to do with,
The engineering fees are through the roof.
yeah.
I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
This is, this is planning, this is engineering, this is stormwater management is, very important. I'm not saying, but, maybe that's, maybe these, I don't know. I really, it's, then impose it on municipalities. You're gonna be going to court a lot, I guess. That's all. That's what's gonna happen. Because some of these municipalities, they're just not gonna comply. And I don't know what the league or what's gonna do is, state mandate, state pay or whatever that is. Awesome. I mean, they don't even have it, you don't even have it in place. What kind of funding formula you're gonna give out or how it's gonna be distributed or
Mm-hmm.
Look for your chip bill to go up.
Well, I think we have a relatively good idea. There's just a lot of details that we're still working out around the edges. But I think that we have a pretty good idea of what we're doing. We just are not at liberty to share until
right.
all the i's are dotted and t's are crossed.
But it's upsetting a few municipalities by you doing that.
Well, I did not expect in all the years that I've worked in the department to be working in a group where we were actually able to provide funding for permittees to come into compliance. So I know it has happened in the past, but I just never have been lucky enough to be in a group where I could offer,
Right.
or help municipalities or permittees receive funding for that. So I think that is a fortunate event in this whole process. I don't know how long and how often, of course, that the money would be available. So I do have to apologize, but I need to take a short break.
Well, no, we're all gonna take a break. We're all gonna take a break. I want to thank you for your taking time and once again and presenting and taking these hard questions and did a good job. And we just look forward to working with you.
Sure,
Yeah.
and you can share with any of the other municipalities. We've been trying to reach out and sometimes people just don't respond. But we've been meeting like we did with some of you individually with municipalities to go over specific questions that they had and have a chance to have a one-on-one dialogue and questions and answers. And we are trying to reach out to municipalities we haven't heard from. If you speak to any and they are interested, or anybody else that was on the call that is interested in meeting with us, by all means, you can email us. You can email me at the my email address at the end of the presentation. You can reach out through anybody otherwise to get in touch with us, and we would be more than happy to set up meeting to discuss the conditions of the permit or any other aspects of the Tier B reassignment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Okay, again, we didn't have a forum, so this is just a general discussion. And anybody have any comments or additions before we adjourn our General discussion,
Next meeting is November 22nd. Weymouth.
November 22nd, Weymouth. Make sure you have your,
The new the email is not gonna come out from Karen again, or is it gonna? come
well,
out from
that's,
Paul?
well, we got Paul stepped up, and let me tell you, I want to congratulate or thank Paul for all his assistance and stuff with putting together. I know it looked like an easy lift to us, but I'm sure.
Are you going to give the $100 to the town?
I guess we're gonna have to see where, where we kind of go from here.
Yeah, this was an experiment.
Yeah, this was and I think it was a good experience, because I mean, really, we are a part of the commission, and, it's good to be on the same page and.
It certainly made the presentations easier.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
that part was,
Yeah.
that worked really well.
That really was.
Say plus plus.
So we'll have to think about the problem with moving around to different locations is we don't know whether the
Yeah.
technology will work
You
there.
can't go everywhere because.
It won't
You know what, but now with the way, Paul, I mean, the way we got it set up, there's no really reason to go move around.
I was hoping you would say
Yeah,
that.
there's no really, and the quite frankly, we might just want to just operate right out of the commission office, have our meetings there. This way, we can just have everything there.
We're
Yeah,
happy to do
I
that.
think. And those, that want to travel, then they can get online, just like it is.
Do it all via Zoom.
Yeah, there's no reason to be,
There's.
because right, with the technology, a lot of them are not up to speed, and I don't want,
Yeah.
I want to keep Paul with his nice dark hair. And not be mad at me when I go up there.
Well, one of the advantages I was gonna say
Yeah,
is that this was also live streamed on YouTube and archived for future viewing. So anyone who missed tonight's meeting can rewatch it, and we can send that to them.
Over it.
So that it's out there. So that's a real benefit.
no, it really is.
So
I really,
Definitely something to think about,
yeah, and I don't think the next, where'd you say we're meeting? next?
Wayman.
And I don't think
Their
they're really,
Wi-Fi is not.
they're not equipped, so you know what, we might just pull it, it's 4 times a year that we really meet, right? 6 times, yeah, so, every other month. So, Weymouth is not set up for it, then, maybe we just, it'd be easier on Paul and everybody, I mean, I don't have a problem just traveling, or, you can go on Zoom, I mean, what do you
It's
think?
easy to
Yeah,
drive for me.
yeah, your drive for you.
I mean,
It's tough.
There's nobody, and everybody, I'm the furthest away.
Yes, you are. Yeah. It's
So-
hard to find those
So
people.
I think we'll have it at the Pinelands office, the next meeting.
All right.
So we'll reach out to, what do you say with this matter?
wait a minute.
Wayman, and,
And then when it
Yeah.
comes to.
and it's 7 o'clock, and really that might generate more of the pine. If there's really some real issues going on, then you'll have available where the Pinelands staff will maybe want to participate, or they can participate in,
Well, we'll see. Yeah, I think as we get closer, we can figure out, what other agenda items you might have that might attract some more people, and I think that's, if I'm remembering right, that's Thanksgiving week, so it might be
So we
not
might,
the greatest.
and that's
date.
one thing we've always run into, being Thanksgiving, but what is the date on that?
22nd.
Is that's the
Second.
Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I think.
That, and you know what, that usually is a little tough. In the past, we've run into difficulty being that week,
I
so
remember
maybe
that last
make it the 29th, the week after.
I don't have a problem with
You
that.
gotta be sure and get a message out to people, because everybody. put it on the
Yeah.
calendar.
Calendar, you're right.
Right. So it would have to go out like maybe as soon as tomorrow, saying that we've had a change. And instead of being the week of Thanksgiving, because people are gonna be running around. It's not like a good meeting.
Paul's gonna have to do that, so I mean, if that all makes sense, I don't have a problem with it.
Just confirm, I mean, we're confirming now that it will be at the commission's headquarters on November 29th at 7 o'clock.
Yes.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, so we
Jay?
will,
Jay,
He's happy that he could just walk across the street.
Jay's doing his chores before he locks up.
so I can get that
The-
information out. It's very simple for me to
Well, the
do.
22nd to keep the Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
If we go to the commission, what about the 29th, like the phone
That's,
at the commission?
that's a fifth.
It's the fifth Tuesday.
Yeah.
And you-
So there's generally 4 Tuesdays, right? So that's good.
Actually, I really like that.
Yeah, that's really a good day. That shouldn't conflict with everybody's,
Right,
yeah.
let's run with that.
Just before I do anything on these stories.
Just check your schedule.
Yeah, nothing.
I have nothing.
I gotta be at work anyhow.
When did you send me out the notification to us?
It was over, I think it was 10 days prior.
You got it.
So Susan, what do you?
I can go earlier.
But Karen usually hits us like 2 days before.
I did that
day
too.
before.
Oh, you
I did
didn't
both.
get it. That's why I'm
Okay.
asking.
That's interesting because I sent it to both.
I got, yeah.
It depends on what list you're on. So I send it to clerks and mayors and some other
You
people.
can't, yeah, you
Yeah.
gotta send it to the individual members because you have a lot of designations.
I don't know who those people are. I need
I'll
that.
have to do some work with the mailing.
Yeah.
You'll have it.
We
have
Is there anybody online? Because we're gonna do.
Right.
Okay.
so-
We'll close the general discussion. Any questions or comments before we?
No, I'm good. I'm
Okay.
good. Thanks. I already
All right, so
adjusted my
if you can,
calendar.
If you can, if you talk to your colleagues and so forth, it'll be the 29th.
Okay. All right. I already adjusted my calendar and I'll let our planning board people know and our town clerk. Okay.